understand the disappearance of Jennifer Kesse, investigators first had to reconstruct the physical and temporal landscape of January 24th, 2006. The timeline is not merely a sequence of events, but a rigid framework against which all subsequent evidence was measured. The primary location of interest was the mosaic at Millennia, a condominium complex located near the mall at Millennia in Orlando, Florida. At the time of the incident, the property was undergoing a significant structural transition. Formerly a rental apartment complex, it was in the process of a complete conversion into privately owned condominiums. This detail is critical to the procedural analysis because it dictated the security environment. According to property records and witness statements gathered later by detectives, the complex was effectively an active construction site. While many units were occupied by new owners or remaining renters, a substantial portion of the property, roughly 50%, was under renovation or unoccupied. Reports indicate that numerous workers were present on the grounds daily. Security logs, or the lack thereof, became a point of contention during the initial inquiry. While the complex boasted a gated entry, residents and investigators noted that the gates were frequently left open during daylight hours to facilitate the movement of contractors, painters, and maintenance crews. Additionally, the electronic lock on the main gate was reportedly malfunctioning, and logs of entry and exit were unreliable. This procedural lapse meant that ingress and egress were largely unmonitored. Jennifer Kesse, a 24-year-old finance manager at Central Florida Investments, had purchased her unit in this complex recently. Profiles developed by law enforcement described her as safety-conscious and highly structured. She was known to communicate her whereabouts to friends and family with consistency. She relied on a predictable routine, a factor that would later allow investigators to narrow the window of her disappearance with a high degree of precision. The timeline relevant to the case began days prior, during a vacation to St. Croix. Jennifer had traveled to the U.S. Virgin Islands with her boyfriend, Rob Allen. This trip established a baseline of activity and communication. They returned to South Florida on Sunday, January 22nd. Jennifer stayed overnight at Allen's residence in Fort Lauderdale before departing for Orlando on the morning of Monday, January 23rd. Monday, January 23rd, represents the final day of verified movement. Jennifer drove from Fort Lauderdale to her place of employment in Acco, Florida, directly from her boyfriend's home. She arrived at work, completed her shift, and left the office at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening. This departure time is corroborated by workplace attendance records and witness testimony. Upon leaving work, the timeline tracks her movement back to the mosaic at Millennia. Phone records analyzed by the Orlando Police Department indicate she made calls during her commute. She spoke with her father, Drew Kesse, while driving. During this conversation, she mentioned the traffic and her estimated arrival time. She arrived at her condominium safely. This fact is supported by the physical evidence found inside the unit later. Her luggage from the St. Croix trip was found inside the front door, partially unpacked. The evening of January 23rd is defined by telephonic evidence. At approximately 7 o'clock that evening, Jennifer spoke with her mother, Joyce Kesse. The conversation was described as routine. Jennifer discussed her day and the fatigue from the travel. Following this, she had a telephone conversation with her boyfriend, Rob Allen. Records show this call with Allen concluded at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. Specifically, the call disconnected at 9:57. During the call, Jennifer indicated she was in bed and preparing to sleep. This is the last verified contact Jennifer Kesse had with any known individual. The cellular data confirms her device was pinging from the tower, serving her residence at the mosaic at Millennia. From a procedural standpoint, the window of silence began at 9:57 on Monday night. The morning of Tuesday, January 24th, presents a reconstruction based on absence rather than direct observation. Jennifer's routine required her to wake early to commute to Akko. Based on the state of the apartment discovered later, investigators hypothesized that she did indeed wake up. When family members and property management personnel entered the unit later that afternoon, the scene they encountered was noted for its distinct lack of disorder. The environment did not suggest a struggle or a forced entry. Instead, the evidence pointed to a completed morning routine. Inside the bathroom, forensic teams noted a damp towel. Evaporation rates suggest the shower had been used within a specific window of hours prior to the discovery, narrowing the time frame of the incident to the morning of January 24th. On the vanity, a hairdryer and makeup products were present on the counter, suggesting they had been used recently. On the bed, distinct items were laid out. Friends and family later identified that Jennifer had a habit of trying on multiple outfits before selecting one for work. The presence of rejected clothing on the bed, combined with the absence of a specific work outfit, indicated to detectives that she had dressed for the day. Her pajamas were found in the bathroom. The bed was unmade, consistent with someone having slept in it and risen in the morning. Items essential for her daily commute, including her cellular telephone, keys, purse, briefcase, and MP3 player, were absent from the residence. Notably, her cell phone charger was also missing. The condominium unit itself showed no signs of forced entry. The locking mechanism on the front door was intact. There was no evidence of a struggle within the foyer or the living area. Valuables often targeted during property crimes were left undisturbed. Her packed luggage, though partially open, was still present. Her vehicle, a black 2004 Chevrolet Malibu, was not in its designated parking space. The timeline shifts to the expectations of her employer. Jennifer was scheduled to attend a meeting at Westgate Resorts that morning. She was known for punctuality. When she failed to arrive by 9 o'clock, her absence was immediately noted as anomalous. Her employer, Central Florida Investments, initiated contact protocols. They called her cellular phone. The calls went directly to voicemail. This deviation from her established pattern prompted her employer to contact her parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, at approximately 11 o'clock that morning. The notification of the parents marks the transition from a missed appointment to a missing person incident. The Kesse family, knowing their daughter's reliability, immediately suspected that an incident had occurred. They began the 2-hour drive from their home to Orlando. Simultaneously, they requested that the property manager at the Mosaic at Millennia check on Jennifer's unit. The property manager approached the unit. According to the report provided to law enforcement, the manager knocked on the door, but received no response. Using a master key, the manager entered the residence. The initial observation confirmed the apartment was empty. The manager noted the layout of the items, the makeup, the clothes, the unmade bed, and reported back that it appeared Jennifer had left for work as usual. However, the silence on her phone persisted. Cell phone records, requested later in the investigation, revealed a critical piece of data. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning on January 24, Jennifer's phone was powered down. Unlike a battery dying, which often sends a final signal, the abrupt cessation of communication suggested the device was manually turned off, or the battery was removed. Analysis of the cellular towers along the Interstate 4 corridor confirmed that her device never initiated a handshake with the towers along her commute route. When the family arrived at the complex that afternoon, they conducted a secondary, more personal sweep of the residence. They noted the missing items and the presence of the damp towel. However, because Jennifer was an adult, and there were initially no overt signs of a struggle or foul play inside the apartment, the classification of the case hovered between a voluntary disappearance and a critical incident. This classification often slows the mobilization of major case resources. The context of the environment outside the apartment unit was scrutinized heavily. The complex was a maze of finished units and construction zones. Dumpsters were present in the parking lot, and workers were moving throughout the site. Investigators noted that the fencing around the perimeter was incomplete in sections due to the renovation work. There were no cameras recording the hallways or the immediate parking area of the complex. This lack of surveillance coverage was a significant hurdle. The investigation then turned to the logistics of her departure. If Jennifer left her unit between 7:30 and 8 o'clock in the morning, she would have walked out her front door, locked it, as indicated by the state of the deadbolt, and walked to her car. The distance from her door to her parking space was short. 2 days later, on January 26th, the investigation shifted from a general missing persons inquiry to a focused criminal investigation following the discovery of Kesse's vehicle. The Chevrolet Malibu was located at a separate apartment complex, Huntington on the Green, situated approximately 1.2 miles from Kesse's residence. A resident of that complex recognized the vehicle from news reports and alerted authorities. Procedural documentation of the vehicle recovery notes that the car was parked oddly, slightly askew within the spot. Specifically, it had been backed into the space, a maneuver that the family stated Jennifer rarely performed. She typically pulled into spaces forward. Upon forensic processing, technicians lifted a latent print from the vehicle's hood, but it was later determined that no match existed in the automated fingerprint identification system. DNA swabbing was performed on key contact points, including the steering wheel and gear shift, but the results did not yield a profile that could be linked to a person of interest at that time. The interior of the car revealed no signs of a physical altercation. However, a specific item of value, a DVD player, was missing, while other valuables were left behind, complicating the theory of a robbery-motivated event. The items deemed essential for the missing individual specifically, her keys, mobile phone, and purse, were not recovered from the cabin or trunk. The most significant piece of evidence regarding the incident was retrieved from the security surveillance system at Huntington on the Green. Investigators secured hard drives containing footage from the morning of January 24th. The timestamp on the video files indicated that at 12 o'clock noon, roughly 4 hours after Kesse failed to arrive at work, an unknown individual drove the Chevrolet Malibu into the lot and parked it. The analysis of this footage highlights a critical frustration in the case: the degradation of evidence due to technical limitations and chance. The surveillance camera captured images of the individual exiting the vehicle and walking away from the drop site. The subject appeared to be wearing light-colored clothing, possibly painter's whites or similar work attire. However, the camera captured a rapid sequence of photographs rather than a continuous video stream, in a statistical anomaly that investigators have scrutinized for years. The individual's face was obscured in every frame by the vertical posts of the perimeter fence. As the subject walked along the fence line, the posts perfectly eclipsed their facial features relative to the camera's angle. The footage was sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for enhancement. Despite advanced processing, the resolution and the obstruction prevented the generation of a composite sketch. The height of the individual was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches, based on the scale of the fence and the vehicle. The gender could not be conclusively determined, although the stride and build were noted in the file as potentially male. Following the discovery of the vehicle, a bloodhound search was conducted. The tracking dog picked up a scent trail from the Chevrolet Malibu at Huntington on the Green that led back toward the Mosaic at Millennia Complex. The animal traced the scent to the front gate of Kesse's residence, but lost the trail at the entrance. This tracking data supports the theory that the individual who dropped off the car may have returned immediately to the location of Kesse's disappearance, possibly on foot. Procedural errors or limitations in the initial hours were later critiqued because the initial classification was not that of a major criminal event. The timeline for sealing the apartment was delayed. Family and friends were allowed inside to gather clothes and search for clues before a full forensic sweep could be conducted. This contamination of the location made it difficult to determine if subtle trace evidence had been present and subsequently lost. The investigation focused repeatedly on the construction angle. The Mosaic complex was a hub of transient activity. Workers had access to master keys for uncompleted units, while management stated that key control logs were maintained. The chaotic nature of a large-scale construction site meant that strict adherence to protocol could not be guaranteed. Several workers were interviewed, and some were administered polygraph examinations. However, language barriers and the transient nature of the workforce created gaps in the investigative net. Many workers were subcontractors, and comprehensive rosters were not immediately available to detectives. One specific lead involved a worker who had allegedly made comments about Jennifer prior to the disappearance. This individual was interviewed, but insufficient evidence existed to detain or charge him. The procedural limitation here was the lack of physical evidence linking any specific person to the interior of Jennifer's car or apartment. Without a DNA match or a fingerprint, the circumstantial connection of proximity was not enough to build a case. Years later, the family initiated legal action to obtain the full police case file. arguing that the investigation had stalled and that a fresh review was necessary. In 2018, a settlement was reached, and thousands of pages of documents were released to private investigators. These records revealed the sheer volume of the initial canvas, but also highlighted the administrative challenges of managing such a large data set. The context of the case is thus defined by a stark contrast. The precise, documented routine of Jennifer Kesse against the chaotic, unregulated environment of a condominium complex under construction. The records show a woman who prepared for work, locked her door, and vanished into a gap in the surveillance grid. The timeline of the incident contains a critical void between 7:30 in the morning, when Kesse presumably left her apartment, and 12 o'clock noon, when her vehicle was abandoned. To date, the records do not offer a conclusion, only a detailed log of a routine interrupted. The investigation remains open, defined by tangible gaps: the damp towel, the silent phone, the abandoned car, and the obscured video. The mile of road between her complex and the drop site remains the primary geographical focus of the inquiry, waiting for a forensic breakthrough to bridge the timeline that ends abruptly at her front door.